Well, maybe that's right. Maybe they're all pulling out because it's much too hard. So I'm pretty sure that we've got Peter online. So is that right, Peter? Can you hear me? Yeah, just wave. You can actually you might have to mute every now and again so we don't get that feedback thing happening. But if you can hear me and see me, that's good. I might be swapping around and even going to pull up a PowerPoint in a minute. And eventually we might get you, Peter, to be hanging out on another table with some other people so you can chat with just a smaller group rather than... If we don't get anybody else here, Peter, just, I was expecting there was 3 or 4 others that I invited, but they haven't turned up yet. It's a pretty small class around the room, and that's okay. But maybe people who are sitting at separate tables might just assemble kind of here at this one. That would make 4 at this table, and then that makes a nice size group. And you've got 3, and you've got 4. So that's great. If we, all I can say is that I know that Nick's fine, and I haven't really spoken to him, but many of you have, I think, in the Ning. So people have actually been sending messages through to Nick in the Ning, which is great. I think it's been quite active in the Ning, and I think Nick is very happy with how active people have been in terms of making a contribution here. So I'll just pop this up on the screen. I'm not saying I'm doing anything in particular with the messages that were left, but there was quite a few messages left in relationship to this item. And I do want to encourage people to think about, and we have got someone for next week, but I just want to make sure that people feel very comfortable about presenting one of the readings. It doesn't have to be the whole suite of readings for the week, but just make sure that you get a chance to try it out. Like, it doesn't have to be very long. As you'll see, I'm not going to go for very long because I want you guys to do some work. And so we might even take some of the suggestions that that people have made here, especially Nick, I suppose. I'm going to take on some of Nick's suggestions because he's pretty aware that there is a way to actually use, and I think we're getting other comments from, who was the student who suggested we could even use some software. I actually saw her comment. That we could use some software, and I actually went to the software site to see whether it was usable to make a social network of our own social network, but it was actually, I think it was related to LinkedIn. Did anybody else try it? It is mostly for LinkedIn. So you'd have to have your social network already established in LinkedIn, is what I've understood. And it probably would work well for those people that have done it. But I think we're thinking about sort of very sort of broader social networks that may be possible to draw up. I was thinking that maybe a bit later, if we wanted to go through this process of seeing whether we are able to, make connections between people that we would believe might help us in certain ways or help us generate a community. Nothing to do necessarily with this course or with your school, but that would be quite good to do a school network if you can think of one. But it might be that you can think of a kind of a network that you've got of relatives or of friends or of colleagues that you could draw. And it might have to be done that way because sometimes the networks don't necessarily connect, and students in schools often find that is the case, or at least my experience of requesting students here, this is not high school students, but students here, to connect up through, say, Facebook, is, Twitter's different for some reason, but Facebook is that they prefer to keep that completely or entirely separate. I think that's actually quite wise and logical, especially if you're a teacher, so that you can have a personal Facebook account, you can have a community of people that you deal with, then that might be a way of drawing up a network, just who is on your Facebook. You can even go to your Facebook page and see it. But you wouldn't probably want to have the same account for students. You could set up a group within Facebook, which is a way of screening out your friends from your social group, but you don't want your students to get into a lot of contact with information that might go through your social network on Facebook. So I think it's very wise not to set a network up that way, or have one different email account and have two accounts, or have set up a group inside Facebook that could be a social network with your students. All right, so you have to find ways around this, but I think most people would be able to think of networks that they're in, and this might help us in sort of establishing what the readings were really alluding to. So we were looking at communities of practice as a sort of starting point for this whole discussion last week. Really, we've got a rough idea of communities of practice. Now, we're thinking now about what would make those work better. So if you had you've got a community of practice, you've got a community of learners, or some people call it in online settings, it's often given a different name. And I'm not saying these names are actually, they don't necessarily always apply to exactly the same things. So there is a community of inquiry notion, a notion of people who may actually be together because they're inquiring about something. So I just want to make that point, that the idea of social capital, which was in the first two readings that we had, one was very recent, one was a little bit older, was about the way in which social capital might be used as a kind of good way of thinking, why a community might be useful in a learning sense. So both of those were really about communities designed to learn from each other. The first one was particularly oriented to learning, using what it said and what I agree with, and maybe you've got different ideas about this, but online discussion as a kind of sort of basic tool for online learning. So we just, even blended learning like this, we might say that our NIM has got a variety of different structures in it, but we could say that there is a discussion structure which would be available to us to form a community in that sort of environment, just to look at things in relationship to the subject. So that was, I think it's very important to kind of look at how that frames up quite a lot of online learning. You've got to really sort of be aware that quite a lot of educational theory and the actual practice of putting things into an online frame is with the intention of trying to get some kind of engagement from the members who are in the class, or the members who are contributing, hopefully contributing to something online. You can do it completely differently, and it would be a different pedagogy. So if I asked you what would be an alternative to setting up a community online if you're trying to do a learning environment, some kind of learning environment, it's not a community. Something a bit more basic, something really simple. If you're just doing some work with online tools, what alternatives are there to setting up an online discussion, for example? Another way of setting up something online.
Given a task,
yeah,
and a group of people have to solve that task online. So they can put in suggestions and whatever. So rather than just general talk, you give them a problem and say, okay, it's up to the online community to solve that specific problem.
Okay, we might even see if we can go to that. And I think that's actually a really clever way of doing this, because in the readings that we were looking at, there was a couple of suggestions about what you might also need to do, apart from actually having a community. That community is not necessarily going to function as well as it might if it doesn't have a task or if it doesn't have a focus.
That's right. Yes.
So I think we might even try that later. But it's really important. And so that's a really good way of setting something up. To do that, you may decide to go to a particular tool environment. It doesn't have to be an online discussion, but you might decide to go to Facebook, for example, or Facebook group.
Or an integrated development environment program.
Okay, so you even do it that way.
Yeah.
I was thinking something even more basic, that if you were going to take a completely different, more traditional approach to learning. So if you're just thinking really, how might you do online learning that has no community in it, or maybe a very flimsy community?
Just play a game, like a maths game online,
Okay, so you could play a game.
like a decimals game or something.
Yeah. So that might actually just be even.
It could be just them playing the game, or they could be doing something like mathematics where they're playing against each other or something like that.
Okay, that's it. That's kind of good too. And actually, I would wonder whether or not there might be a sense of community even in the game. So sometimes games environments, and so that's not a bad thing. I'm saying that's actually a good thing.
Yeah.
And it may actually be in a similar way. You've got a kind of a project in mind, even though there might be intentional kind of competition. But that is part of the process that you might be hoping for that competition to help students learn something about the intention of the game or the intention of your course. I was thinking really basic. Like one of the things that we have done in the past and what we do still do here at Melbourne University, for example, is we just present information online. There is really an expectation that, and it's perhaps a false expectation, and maybe the reason why it's very hard to remember this, because not that many people still follow this pedagogy, but the pedagogy of transfer. That is, you deliver online some content, and that people have an expectation, or the teacher has an expectation that the students will receive that content and be able to do something with it. It may still be that they're in a community of learners, or very flimsy, if you like, not a very strong community, but they've got a connection, I suppose, through the focus of the content. And it's not absolutely, unusable as a pedagogy. If you have got any experience, and I'll just ask this question: has anyone worked in a MOOC or tried to do a MOOC? Does anyone know what I mean by a MOOC? A massive online open course. They've started to do.
Oh, is that like uni online, like that sort of stuff? Oh.
Uni online may have some MOOCs in it. I don't know whether they do, but Coursera. Have you worked with Coursera?
Yeah.
Yeah. Could you tell us a little bit about how that was, how that worked? I mean, there was different elements, but I imagine they started off with something.
Well, I think if you actually pay for it, it makes a difference. Because with my experience, what happens is when I enroll in a lot of courses, but sometimes because of work or something, I can't actually finish it. So
Yeah.
So if you actually pay for it, I think it works better.
Yeah.
And I guess there are only certain courses that actually allow you to have discussions and things like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, but I haven't really, tried that.
Yeah. Okay. So,
I did the CSER, the
yes.
South Australian one, yeah.
Yeah.
It just felt like an online course to me, kind of, but there was the Google Plus community that was linked to that, where we had to comment on people's assignments and things that they submitted, and then they would comment on my portfolio and stuff like that. That was probably the real community element of it. Other than that, it was just like the delivery of an online course.
Yeah.
So,
the word, and you're quite right, what most of the groups try and do, and Melbourne University has got, I think, quite a lot of MOOCs running at the moment, about 15. So you can do these, and often, as you say, you can do them without paying. So you don't have to you enroll, you're considered to be part of the community of learners, but you don't necessarily have to pay unless you want some kind of credit. So that's the general idea of them, is that there's multiple MOOCs now around the world, and from some of the best universities in the world. The only reason I'm bringing this up is because the starting point for a MOOC environment, as a learning environment is very strongly a transfer or delivery model. So at the first point of call, often there is an expectation on the design of the MOOCs from universities is that they have to present some content. So just like a lecture, it's not that dissimilar from a normal learning experience, but there is a long period of time in developing a MOOC content, and they do invest quite a bit of money. They are worth doing for that reason, and you can actually get quite a lot of information from a MOOC without being a strong member of the community or even paying. So you can actually get, hopefully, what I was trying to say is that you can use the transfer model. So you can actually get a little bit of the idea of the material or the content from a straight transfer model. I'm not promoting it, and I'm thinking what most of the Melbourne University MOOCs try and do is build in, which you can in Coursera, build in an online discussion. It may actually be linked out. The one that I was doing was actually linked out to a Facebook group, and the Facebook group was super hectic. It was much more active really than the online discussion. I don't know whether that's because Facebook, as we were talking last week, I think about
omnipresent.
it's easier to get to, people are familiar with it, the group things come up on you, if you in Facebook, you'll get them anyway. So it was a very active environment in this CMOOC I did, not CMOOC, just MOOC from the University of Melbourne last year. It was very, very active in Facebook. The online discussion was active, but nowhere near as active. When I say active too, the other thing about the word massive is that there's quite a lot of students often in these environments, which is one of the reasons that they work out ways for some of the work to be distributed, like you assessing somebody else's work is a good thing and educationally sound thing, but there's also an imperative to get some feedback. You're not going to get feedback to, the MOOC I was in had 40,000 students in it, all around the world, some of who spoke Spanish as their main other languages. So you would rely upon Spanish speakers to make contributions back to, or feedback back to those students, unless there was, obviously some translation you can do, even using Google Translate or something of that nature. That's basically the way you could communicate. But the native speakers often sort of spoke together or texted each other. And so that's the reason why you do want to have a bit of a community formed, and sometimes the community is actually offsite, not directly inside the MOOC. So I just use that as an example. I'm not saying we're talking about MOOCs tonight. I want to talk more about the notion of why we might want to generate the notion of community as part of a community of practice, right? And where could social capital fit in, and why do we even think that social capital might be a relevant kind of possible way of explaining what we're looking for, in the community. It may not be. I mean, it's possible that it's not the best sort of solution to getting engagement online, but it is one of the ways that people have written about. Does anyone remember there was a couple of different kinds of social capital that Nick referred to that he really liked, which was in the second older article?
Bridging and bonding.
Yeah,
Part.
that's right. So do you have any idea what those two terms mean?
Well, there's close-knit communities, very close-knit.
Yeah.
And then the bridging one where it's more widespread.
Yeah.
Okay, that's how I see the concept of those two.
Does anybody else want to add anything to that? Does anyone have
Is there a distinction between, is that the one where they spoke about the distinction between the higher achieving students and they were more likely to have connections with people anywhere and everywhere, and then the lower achieving students were more likely to just stick with their close-knit groups that were at the same level as them because they felt more comfortable. Is that, am I making the right connection or not?
You're not making the right connection.
Okay.
You are making a very good point. That point we
That
will
really
get
stuck
to.
with me, that point.
Yeah, so that is actually a really relevant point in relationship, and it does actually feed off the discussion in relationship to bridging and bonding.
Yeah.
Because I think just to establish the bridging and bonding thing so that we kind of get our ideas sort of clear around that because it does lead to your notion, and that is that in many communities, when you've got strong social capital, what you're trying to do is use the community as a resource. And if you think about your own, you might have to think about your own in a second. So you're going to have to draw up a little map of a community, and it may be possible that you'll find a community that's got bonding capital. Like it might be possible to actually identify the bonding capital, because bonding would be a stronger link to others, almost like a family link, like a reliable, doesn't matter what you do kind of link. It is actually something that you can draw upon because it's a connection you've got mostly through an activity, some sort of practice. Obviously, we're talking about communities of practice, but like being in a family is actually one of the reasons why bonding capital sometimes works very well in families, sometimes it doesn't. And sometimes families don't sort of contribute as much to each other as perhaps they should. But you can think perhaps of colleague sort of communities at school where you might need to get, I don't know, some help with some kind of issue that you want to deal with in terms of student, and you know that in the school there is this person who's great at dealing with different problems that happen in the school, so you go to them and ask for advice. That kind of resource would probably come from a bonding capital kind of community, a close-knit community that you can rely upon, that probably is a bit more ongoing, that may not last as long as a University of Melbourne course. I mean, may last a bit longer than the University of Melbourne. We could have some bonding capital. I mean, there's no reason not to, but it will be not as strong, if you like, as the colleagues that you may have around you, or just your friends. So your friendship group is probably even stronger. So if you needed to, and I suppose, now it may have even been Peter, someone put a video up, which was kind of clever in relationship to talking about strong community or strong capital bonding, where people might need a truck, you might need to move house, and you need to get some transport organised.
It was a YouTube.
It was a YouTube. Someone, yeah. So it is a good example of bonding capital. So you draw upon other people who you would, who you can go directly to, and you don't feel uncomfortable about asking for stuff, and they wouldn't feel uncomfortable about asking you. It may not always happen in families that can be the same.
I'm trying to get a working bee. If you're moving house, getting a working bee together from different people.
Yeah.
I don't want to do that, but if they're bonding, they'll surely help out.
Yeah. Now, when I say that, and this is, so it sounds like that the other form of capital, bridging capital, may not sound as good. And I'm not trying to say that it's not as good. I'm going to maybe go against the reading a bit. It's one of the good things about reading. That's why I'm actually promoting this, is you can have your own opinion and you can try out your opinion. So I can try it out with you. The other kind of capital, as you'd expect, if it's not bonding capital, it's kind of bridging capital. It's a lot weaker. It doesn't have the strength of bonding capital. It still is a resource, but it's via weak links, not strong links. And it may not even be one of the ways to characterize some sort of links that you've probably already got. And if you think about this when you draw up your little maps, it may be that you have quite a lot of bridging capital links in online or social network communities that are online. So social networks, when I'm saying social networks that are online, can be of the bonding capital type, and many students in schools will have the bonding capital, and that's why they don't want to have the teachers interfere with their Facebook group. But they may also have the weak link type with members of a community. There's still a community, and they can use that community in various ways, but maybe only for particular kinds of tasks. It's not a completely bonding kind of relationship. They're not always available, and it's a very common feature of online discussions, by the way, in schools and universities and so forth, that although schools are a bit different because often the students in a school will actually see each other from year to year and may see each other in classroom and or playground or outside of school settings. So they've got the footy club and other activities that will allow for bonding capital to happen. But universities is a better example, where you've got a completely online course and the students never sort of meet face to face. There is a chance that they could get together and have very strong links and have a bond, which may actually end up being that they stay online together outside the class time and communicate about other things like the footy or whatever they would naturally talk about in a discussion with their friends, or maybe even draw upon their ideas for other courses that they're doing or other advice that they may want. But the general, I think, the general characterisation you could make of many online courses at university level is that they're mostly the bridging capital kind. They're short term, they are for a particular purpose, and they do have, that may have a, they may only get together for that purpose. They may, there is a certain level at which that is a resource. Yep.
It might just be limited to the lifespan of the course.
It might just be limited to the lifespan of the course. Yeah. So it's exactly right. Yeah. So that is one of the things you have to think about, especially in if you're setting some sort of online community up, or even trying to set up a community for learners just in face-to-face settings, that it may be, it's going to draw upon not the full bonding capital type, although that might be the ideal, but, and obviously that is an ideal, especially in workplaces. You want people to bond and be able to develop each other's learning on the job. And so if you look at communities of practice, the actual, the best examples are apprenticeship models. I'm saying there may be better ones, but those sort of models where may not be, but it is a resource. You're using the people to teach you something about that job. You will draw upon that. They may even tell you what job you've got to do before you can move to the next job. So there's a kind of a structure and a strong bond. Might not be a positive bond, it's just a bond of authority, bond of the relationship between the people in a localized workplace, or even an online workplace. Sometimes that can actually be that as well. But in online learning sometimes, and there is a bit of research on this. Caroline Hawthorne writes about communities of practice and online discussion, and she has sort of shifted a bit. She's moved more towards I think this is mentioned, the bridging capital kind of notion. That I think Clay Shirky came up with the idea of networks of loose ties. Have you heard of that notion? Social networks online work very well because they have got lots and lots of people. So often in a social network, you've got a critical mass, and they try. You may even try to get more and more people into a community for that reason, to get that critical mass. But you're not really trying for the full bonding capital kind of link. You want to have a group of people make a commitment to this one thing, and they continue to work on that one thing, but they aren't necessarily, and that you're using each other for a resource to learn, but not about their whole life. It's not like completely bonded. You might want to set that up, but this is the reason why you might do an interpretation a little bit of whether MOOCs work or don't work, and many people say they don't work because they go past the kind of level of even bridging capital. Like it's very hard to get 40,000 people to have any connection really to each other at all, except if you break it down.
Except at the football.
Or maybe at the football. Okay, so yeah, but they're in the same location. I think the way that MOOCs work is that you may naturally form the bridging capital kind of not localized, but communities of similarly interested groups. They're still a network, they're still in a bigger group, but they're forming a group to discuss things themselves. Now, this is the point that you were making. Sorry, your name?
Kate.
Kate. That Kate was making is that there's a variety of critiques of this, even within classroom setting. Some people would argue that the people that benefit most from online communities of practice that make the most out of it are often the people that contribute the most, and they might be considered to be the people with the most social capital. So sometimes it's because they've got a pre-existing kind of ability to resource others. And so if you are a smart person and you're known to be a smart person, or you've got certain kinds of skills, you may actually become part of a network very quickly, and you may become a kind of a node or a mentor, but the way to make it work, or the criticism is that people need to actually communicate together. So when people start communicating, that kind of bonding does actually start occurring, and people do actually benefit from that kind of communication. Just the mere fact that they're communicating, linking to each other, supporting each other, asking questions of each other, responding, solving problems, as you sort of suggested, trying to actually get to some kind of output, whatever. They're actually, they're often going to naturally form kind of groups, partially around expertise and partially around the fact that people kind of who have the ability to communicate may actually have that already. Do you follow what I'm saying? So if they're kind of good at or they want to, they're just outgoing enough to want to contribute, they may actually get the benefit more than those that don't easily get involved. So that the idea is to get everyone involved, and you may have to find ways to prompt people into involvement. So maybe putting a really outgoing person with a person who needs mentoring. Do you follow? Like to even be that sort of strict about it, but in a naturally forming, a critique of the online environments in the first article was that they can actually focus down to the people that were already, quite resourceful, had resources, and those resources could be drawn upon, joined up with people who also had resources. So you have this kind of self-fulfilling sort of outcome that people who are already good at something actually get better because they exchange with a smaller group who are already kind of good at something else maybe, and that's the notion of the capital exchange.
That's one of the impression I've got from that in the article. You did all that research and wrote that article to come up with that conclusion.
Well,
But those sort of people are going to do well anyway. It did tend to be self-fulfilling.
yeah,
Sort of conclusion in that one.
yeah,
I think because the first article was a little bit older, they were very negative on the ways in which online communities could promote bonding relationships and things like that. But I think because it was written in the early thousands, there wouldn't have been, there wouldn't have been a lot of communities out there that were really strong and showing how things like that can happen. So I think it's kind of changing, but I liked in the Wiki's article how they spoke about the purpose for what you're doing, and if you don't have a clearly defined purpose or it's not really explicit about what that community is there for, then it's just a bit ad hoc.
yeah.
And so they'll get more out of it if you have a purpose, a clearly defined purpose.
Yeah, and I think that is actually that's a very, very important point. And it's funny that you say what you say, because I've been to presentations on research findings after online communities have been set up, especially here in Melbourne. They try things out all the time, and sometimes the best ones to go to are the ones that get the most money, like medicine. They seem to have quite a good technical support for the things that they try out, and then you get the lecturer from the medicine department say something very similar to, which could be expected, that they put together like fantastic course materials and fantastic kinds of structures for interaction and contributions, and manage those really, really well, and have lots of feedback to the students. And then the lecturer says at the seminar, but the funny thing is about this is at Melbourne, for example, our medical students happen to be really, really bright, and we don't know, because they didn't get any brighter because we actually had this community or this this setup, this multimedia setup that was really expensive, they're still passing at the same rate as they did before. So we just need, it's because they're already going to do that anyway. That, you know, they were actually going to be successful anyway. So it's a similar critique that is in that article, and you think that it's sort of self-evident that that would happen, and maybe it is. But there may be possibilities, and that's what we have to think of using communities as a kind of a starting point for encouraging an interaction and an engagement in doing something. And I think the starting point that you alluded to, which was in the wiki writing, was actually quite good. So just see whether or not actually I wrote this up, and I'm not sure whether I can get this up on your screen, Peter, but I'll just see if I can. I'll just go back. Unfortunately, I've got to swap between these two. So let's see, Peter, screen share. So you might see this, Peter. Hopefully you can when I get to it. Probably not seeing it now.
Is this on the Ning site?
I have actually got it up on the Ning site, so you can.
Under blog, or
It's probably under my page or my blog. Oh, it's not actually loading very well, but so it was actually a bit of research done by Skada Malia in relationship to communities of practice. She was actually focusing on communities of practice, but in an online kind of way as well. So that a COP, if they don't have an intentional goal for learning and producing new knowledge, then they descend into what she's calling shallow constructivism, which I haven't actually read this article, but I have a feeling that that would actually be more kind of personalised constructivist learning, so learning just for yourself, or not necessarily distributing the knowledge across the group. So people can still learn, but having many people have actually got this, I think, in relationship to, I'm going to use Facebook as an example. You do actually get that kind of learning going on in Facebook. You learn about current events and things that are happening, and maybe celebrity events and so forth. But whether or not you classify that as being kind of deep learning commitment, or well, to some people, I suppose the celebrity status is actually a focus. You know, they're really focused on some aspect of what they get through Facebook, so they are learning more deeply. But you know, often it isn't as deep as perhaps it could be. So they're not sure, you know, of what they're trying to learn or why they're trying to do what they're doing. So it is about having an intention, you know, behind what you're doing to get that kind of connection between people to establish a stronger community of practice. Scarmalia actually referred to a model for thinking about this. So she actually put 5 things into her suggestion. I really like the way that she's sort of talking about engaging groups to produce new knowledge. May not be apparent really if you're working in school that you want students to produce new knowledge, but for them sometimes it is. But she is also referring to the general kind of commitment that sort of more advanced experts who are engaged in communities of practice trying to, their intention is not always to reproduce or reverse the same knowledge base. They're not just designing, you know, their messaging or designing their connections to others on the basis of just reflecting on pre-existing knowledge. They're trying to reproduce, not trying to reproduce, they're trying to establish a new understanding of something. Their intention is to solve a problem in relationship, yes, to previous knowledge. So it's intentional, and it's about knowledge building. She's also suggesting that it's collaborative activity, and collaboration is an important kind of term. It could be that different people are doing the same thing, it doesn't, sometimes collaboration can require people to do different things and contribute at different points. Sometimes that's called cooperation, but in fact collaboration is they're doing the same thing. Learners take responsibility for their own learning goals. So people take some kind of intentional kind of personal goal in relationship to the community's goal, the intention of the community, and they are identifying problems and gaps in their understanding of a subject, and then often drawing upon the community, deciding how to solve these problems. It may be that they're solving the problem some other way. There may actually be an experiment, or there may be some kind of tour or something that they're going to go on, or some kind of arriving at some kind of new understanding that way. But they've got an intention, a personal intention, as well as an intention that's been set by the group, and they're going to use the group to feed back information about where they have got gaps and where they may need to go to solve the problems that they may have identified and agreed that they've got, or that the community is actually, without being negative about it, they're identifying where things could be improved or what things might need to be done. So that she then uses another series of research that she put together in relationship to some principles for setting this up, which I just, they called it the computer-supported intentional learning environment. It's just a term. These people come up with these fantastic terms. It's possible that if we tried to, we could sort of look at either the first 5 broad sort of characteristics. You could probably break them into these 11 probably fit into these, but making knowledge construction activities overt. Now, I've just wondered whether or not that might be clearly just a matter of a focus question, having a clear idea of your group's intention, attending to goals, so being clear about what it is you're trying to achieve, being you might just be trying to answer the question, but maybe there's sub-goals or sets of goals in relationship to that. Treat knowledge lacks in a positive way, so that's what I was saying earlier. So being aware that not everyone will be up to the same point, and that's actually a positive thing. We can actually help each other by supporting each other through any gaps that we may have in our own knowledge base. Provide process relevant feedback. So there should be a kind of a process to getting feedback, but the feedback may actually be on, let's try this, let's try something else. Encourage learning strategies other than rehearsal. So when I said rehearsal before, I meant just duplicating things, and so not just going for that, not just representing the same thing, but trying to think of new ideas, putting some of the ideas from your readings or your students' readings into their own experience and trying that out with the group. So not just rehearsing the other person's ideas, but saying something about it, thinking of your own interpretation. Encourage multiple passes through information. There's probably many things that you wouldn't necessarily find in these computer-supported intentional learning environments that would always happen every time, but she's got 11, so I'm just going through them. So encouraging multiple passes through information, so just reinforcing some of the ways in which people are thinking about issues, but with the intention of trying to find new things. Support varied ways for students to organise their knowledge. So again, you've got this opportunity in the technological environment to present information visually, as well as orally, as well as with video or writing. But there may actually be, like you said earlier, game kind of activities, or thinking through whether we need to go out to the real world and bring in some actual samples of the objects that we're looking for or looking at. Encourage maximum use and examination of existing knowledge. So yes, obviously using the group, using the people in the group, and that's obviously you're going to draw upon the group, so you need to actually find out whether anyone in the group knows something about this particular topic before you, as you proceed. Provide opportunities for reflexivity and individual learning styles, and again that may actually be in relationship to multimodal kind of techniques that you might suggest that people, let's see if we can do photographs for this exercise to sort of provide some presentational material or some kind of way of giving you an idea of what this topic's about. It may be just PowerPoints or, you know, a video. Facilitate transfer of knowledge across contexts. So, you know, being aware that there may be some difficulties, you know, with the contextual differences. And I said before about the MOOCs that it was quite difficult to get an idea of how the Spanish speakers were going, but you could, if you were sort of really trying to facilitate it, we did different people suggest that we use Google Translate, so you're trying to facilitate a cross-context method, but it was also actually quite good to get a bit of an idea of their context, so they would tell you what was different about their context, not just their language differences, but different contextual teaching environments or their, it was actually the actual environment, climate environments that they were dealing with, the actual differences in the way that their countries worked. Facilitate transfer of knowledge across context, give students responsibility for contributing to each other's learning. So actually being, you might have to be quite kind of directing. And this is what we're saying before, the criticism, maybe it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, but you don't want necessarily that to occur. So you may have to direct that certain activities, even if it's only a short-term activity, has to be done in a more kind of, you know, heterogeneous kind of group, like a group of, you know, the people who don't naturally get together. So you just randomly assign people to a group for a particular kind of activity. Some of these things are really straightforward for, really straightforward, you know, learning techniques that are not necessarily related to online, but they are related to communities. All right. I know that this was, we just said this, but in a kind of a strange way, Benga, who has written about communities in practice, does actually repeat it. If an institutional setting for learning does not offer new forms of identification and negotiability, that is meaningful forms of membership and empowering forms of ownership of meaning, then it will most likely reproduce the communities and economies of meaning outside of it. So the people that are already resourced, have resources and have already formed friendships with like-minded people outside of a community you set up, if you don't allow them to set up an alternative in an online community, is what, or face-to-face community, they've got a different identity that they could actually draw upon, in that maybe not close-knit, maybe not super bonded capital sense, but in the kind of bridging capital sense, they can set up a way of meaningfully identifying themselves within that community. They can actually be an expert in a different thing. They can be the go-to person on a particular thing. So you don't want to necessarily just have friendship groups, is what I think Beng is getting to. So you could do it friendship group-wise, and there would be strong bonding capital within that. But if you wanted to see where it takes you,
More experience. I mean,
well, sometimes the diversity of opinion can actually lead to a much wider method of solving problems. And sometimes, like I said with families, sometimes people who know each other really well know that they don't need to do things with each other. They're not always going to be, not always going to be supplying the resources that are needed. So sometimes the kind of non-friendship groups do actually set up an identity that does actually become meaningful within that group, and it's different to the meanings that they may have got in their friendship groups or their family groups or whatever. So there's a slight difference, I think, Beng is pointing to here. Anyway, what I was thinking maybe really quite fun